Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Blinken, much of this debate here today has been about the role of Congress and our need to trust in the ability of the administration to craft a good deal, and in the fact that we're going to be consulted. That was the question that you asked. So I want to take you back to the last time you were before this committee, and I asked you a question at that time during your nomination about whether there would be any unilateral changes or changes in Cuba policy. And your answer, and I want to quote it to you, it said, quote, "Anything that in the future might be done on Cuba would be done in full consultation with a real meaning of the word consultation that I just alluded to with this committee," end quote. You told me that the last time you were before this committee. Who did you consult with on this committee? Or who did the administration consult with on this committee before it announced the changes on the 17th of December?
Senator, I regret that I did not live up to the standard I set during that hearing and in the remarks that you just quoted. I think that I could have done a better job in engaging with you and consulting with you in advance, and I regret that.
Did you consult with the chairman of the committee at the time?
A number of members, I think, were reached out to, consulted. What happened was this.
Who were the members that were consulted?
If I could come back to you on that, I would need to discuss with any, first of all, get an accounting of that, and also make sure that any members who were consulted would want that.
If I could interject, I assure you that I was not consulted.
Mr. Chairman, you were the chairman at the time. Were you consulted?
Well, no. There's a difference between notification and consultation.
The reason why
to be notified, when it's going to happen is not consultation.
And the reason why this is relevant is we're being told that we're going to be in the loop on everything that's happening with Iran. We have an example very recently of we were not in the loop. You were aware at the time that these conversations were occurring with the Cubans, were you not?
I was aware generally that they were occurring. I think what happened in the end game was, as you know, Senator, this was a very delicate situation in which we were trying to get Alan Gross back. We were trying to get our asset back, and in the end game of that, there was a lot going on to make sure that that happened in a safe and secure way. But again, I come back to what I said at the outset. I think you're right to point it out.
But I'm not quarreling with the Alan Gross release. I'm quarreling with the policy changes that were made. Why it's relevant to Iran is we're being asked to trust that we're going to be fully consulted. Well, the use of the word consultation, as it's been defined by the administration in the last instance that I've just cited, is problematic. I mean, I don't want to make this all about Cuba, but just to not to belabor the point, but I also asked whether there would be any changes in policy absent democratic order, and you said that it would just be, I asked you whether this changes. When you say move forward on democratic reforms, not simply economic reforms, and you said not simply economic reforms, and clearly we don't see any democratic reforms. There was a release of 53 political prisoners. 14 had already been released on December 17th. One of them had been released almost a full year before December 17th. 4 had fully completed their sentences. 5 have been rearrested. And since the deal was done on the 17th, 200 new political arrests have occurred in Cuba. But here's why that's relevant to this, because we're being asked as a Congress to sit tight, because we're going to be fully consulted, and it sounds like the only people that are going to be fully consulted are the people who agree with the administration. And if you don't agree with the administration, then you'll just be notified. My second point goes to the question that both Senator Udall asked about who's in charge, but also Senator Johnson asked about why the Iranians would undergo so much pain in pursuit of this. The answer to who's in charge, unless you dispute it, is ultimately who's in charge is who they call the supreme leader, the Ayatollah. Is that accurate?
Senator, he is the first among equals in our judgment, but he does have other constituencies that he has to factor in his.
All right. Well, can they possibly agree to a change like of the kinds we're contemplating without his approval, given the support he has in their legislative branch?
I think that's highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. So who is this Ayatollah? Well, the Ayatollah is not simply a head of state as we normally see it, the head of a nation state. He is a radical cleric who views himself, first of all, doesn't just view Iran as a nation state, it views Iran as a cause, as Henry Kissinger has described it. And the cause is to eventually have the entire world living under the flag of Islam. That's actually stated in their constitution. It goes further and states that the Ayatollah is not just the leader of Iran, he's the leader of all Muslims in the world. Isn't that accurate? That's his position and title. So he doesn't view, he's just basically, Iran is where he lives, but he views his mandate as extending to the whole world. But it goes beyond this. These are unambiguous statements on their part. He doesn't just view himself as a cleric. He views himself as the temporary fill-in for the 13th Imam, the Mahdi, who under Shia, his interpretation of Shia, and I think the mainstream interpretation of Shia, is an imam that's currently in occultation that will emerge one day in the world and govern the world, the entire world, under the flag of Islam. And their stated purpose for the state of Iran is to serve as a base for that effort throughout the world. That is what motivates him. We are ascribing to his regime nation-state characteristics of a normal country that has a cost-benefit analysis about what's in the national interest of Iran. And I don't dispute that there might be some political leaders in Iran that hold those views, but the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, he doesn't view it that way. He views not just his calling, but his obligation to bring about the arrival of the 13th Imam and to unify the world under the flag of radical Islam as he defines it. And here's why that's important. Under his clerical interpretation and that of many in Shia, the 13th Imam cannot emerge until there's a cataclysmic showdown between the Muslim and non-Muslim world. And when a country led by a person who wants there to be a cataclysmic showdown between the Muslim and non-Muslim world has designs on a nuclear weapon, now we have cause for great concern. And that's why they expand their military capability, and that's why they want a nuclear weapon. Now, what they've shown is some crafty ability they reject everything that's not Islamic in the world. They reject the legitimacy of the UN, they reject the legitimacy of the United States, but they're very crafty. They accept the benefits of the international order, for example, their seat at the UN, but while still being able to reject their obligations under that international order. So what have they done with all that? Well, let's go through the timeline. In 2003, the position of the world was no enrichment. Then it became you can enrich up to 20%. Then it became you can enrich over 20% as long as you send it overseas. And now it's you can enrich up to 20% in Iran as long as it's for a research facility. So if you go the timeline of what they've been able to achieve over the last 10 years, it's pretty impressive how they've been able to use this process. Another 5 years, maybe we'll build the bomb for them at the rate this is going. And meantime, the other two components of a nuclear program move forward unabated. A weapon design, you can buy that. You can buy that. You can buy a weapons design right now. Heck, you can download it online potentially if it's a crude weapon. And the missile program continues unabated. They continue to test long-range missile capabilities, not to mention adding to their already considerable conventional weapons capability. And so this is why we're very concerned, and we have a right to be concerned. This is not a traditional nation state undergoing a cost-benefit analysis. This is a cleric-led regime, a clerical government with a clear intent of ultimately one day unifying the entire world under the flag of their radical version of Islam, led by someone who believes that will only happen after a cataclysmic showdown with the West. So we have real reasons to be deeply concerned and skeptical about the ability to reach any arrangement, and real reasons to believe that they are willing to accept short-term suspensions because their long-term view is that at the end of the day, they're going to be at that showdown point, and if they have nuclear weapons, they're even better off than they would normally be. And that's why we're so skeptical about this deal. We're not dealing with Belgium here. We're not dealing with Luxembourg. We are dealing with a radical cleric with a radical view of his obligation and role in the world, and he wants nuclear weapons to be able to do it. And I believe that ultimately, I think no one here could dispute that ultimately, even if they agree to a short suspension, that is their goal in the long term. And as the North Koreans have shown, you can agree to all sorts of short-term suspensions, and you can always invent the pretext for why now I need the weapon. Because of the hostilities of the West, because it's time for the hitting imam to emerge, whatever. And that's what we're concerned about. They will retain all the infrastructure that it takes to enrich. They will have a weapons design, and they will have the delivery system and the missiles. And at some point, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, they build the weapon, and now the world is at their mercy. And that's why we're so skeptical.
Senator, just to respond briefly, we share your concern and we share your skepticism precisely because of Iran's long track record that you alluded to, which is exactly why any agreement we reach has to have the most stringent restrictions on its program and the most stringent requirements on access and transparency and monitoring to give us confidence that they will not break out. I just want to say, with regard to consultations going forward, you know, I think on this issue, and it's my sense that over the past months and in the past years, the administration has been here in closed sessions, obviously in open hearings, in one-on-one conversations and smaller group conversations to lay out, I think, extensively where we are, where we're trying to go on the Iran negotiations. I commit to you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Senator Rubio, others, that going forward, we will not only continue that, we will expand that, and we will be up here any time that you want, any place to talk about where we are. And again, some of that we just have to do in a closed session or in a private group because the negotiations are ongoing. But we want to make sure that you see the full details of what we're trying to achieve. With regard to the suspicions about Iran and the Supreme Leader, again, we share them. We could spend all day here going through the outrageous things that he has said in the past, including the recent past, about us, about Israel, about other designs. But sometimes reality has a way of intruding. And no matter what it is that he may believe and he may want, and no matter his exceptional role in the system, I think you're right about that, he has to deal with the realities that Iran is facing. And he has seen a country that has been subjected to extraordinary pressure economically, that has been more and more isolated, and he's seeing politically that a lot of the Iranian people don't like that. And Rouhani's election, in our judgment, was a response to that. We've seen him give the negotiators, I think, more leeway than, frankly, we would have expected, possibly at the outset. He's kept the talks going. We continue to make progress. And at the end of the day, we will all have to judge whether what we've achieved in any kind of solution meets our security interests. And we will not take a bad deal, precisely because we share your concerns and share your suspicions. But this is not happening in a vacuum. And I think we also have to ask ourselves continuously, as compared to what? It's going to be, if we are not able to reach an agreement, it may become increasingly difficult to sustain the sanctions regime. It depends a lot, I think, on what Undersecretary Cohen said about who is perceived as being responsible for the failure to get a strong agreement. Many of our partners have come along kicking and screaming to implement sanctions. It's been against their economic interest. We've held them there. Part of that, a large part of that, is because they believe we're trying to drive to an agreement. And indeed, that's the purpose, as has been said, of the sanctions, to get them to the table. So we'll have to test all of this out. We, again, start from the same proposition you do. We are very, very suspicious, but we also see the reality that's intruding on the Supreme Leader's thinking.